My mother-in-law set the last gift box down on the polished oak table and smiled as if nothing was missing. Everyone else had something wrapped in silk paper and tied with gold ribbon. I sat there with empty hands and a tight smile, waiting for the moment that never came. "Oh," she said lightly, tapping her glass with a manicured nail. "I suppose we forgot yours." A few soft laughs circled the table. Not cruel on the surface, just quiet enough to be excused. She leaned back in her chair and added, almost casually, "Well, you know, you're not exactly the center of this family." The room didn't go silent. It just shifted. Eyes moved. Glances dropped. My husband, Daniel Harper, looked down at his plate like the green beans suddenly mattered more than anything else.
He didn't speak.
He didn't defend me. And in that moment, something inside me settled into a stillness that felt colder than anger. I folded my hands neatly in my lap. I nodded once. And I said, "Of course." The conversation resumed like nothing had happened. Wine glasses clinked. Laughter returned. But I stopped hearing any of it. Because that wasn't the first time. It was just the first time they said it out loud. For 2 years, I had been the outsider in the Harper family. Not rejected loudly. Not excluded officially. Just quietly diminished. They praised Daniel constantly. They adored his sister, Caroline Harper, with her perfect hair and perfect husband and perfect life. They spoke about legacy, about family name, about tradition. And every time I entered the room, it felt like I had interrupted something sacred. I wasn't born into their world. I came from a modest background. I worked my way through college. I built my own career in financial consulting. And apparently, none of that mattered at their table. Because to them, I was just the woman Daniel married. Not the woman he chose. Not the woman who supported him. Just an addition. And additions, in their world, were optional. That night, when we got home, Daniel loosened his tie and said, "Don't take it personally." I stood by the kitchen counter, still in my dress, still holding the silence I had carried all evening. "Not personally?" I repeated. He sighed, tired, as if I was the one making things difficult. "They didn't mean it like that." I looked at him carefully. "They said I wasn't important. They were joking." I let that sit between us. Then I asked quietly, "Was it funny?" He didn't answer. He just walked past me and turned on the television. That was the moment I understood something clearly. I wasn't just invisible to his family. I was becoming invisible to him. And that realization didn't break me. It sharpened me. The next morning, I woke up before sunrise. I made coffee. I sat at the dining table with my laptop. And I opened a file I hadn't touched in months. It was a proposal. A detailed acquisition strategy for a luxury real estate portfolio. One that the Harper family had been trying to secure for over a year. They didn't know I had access to it. They didn't know I had been consulting independently on the side. And they definitely didn't know that I was the reason that deal was still within reach. I stared at the numbers. At the leverage points. At the final approval line that still hadn't been signed. Then I closed the file. Because suddenly, I wasn't sure they deserved it. Days passed. The tension didn't disappear. It settled into something quieter. Daniel stopped mentioning his family. I stopped asking. We existed in the same space without truly connecting. Until a week later, when he came home earlier than usual. He looked unsettled. "They're having a dinner," he said. I didn't look up from my notes. "That's nice. They want you there." That made me pause. I slowly lifted my gaze. "Why?" He hesitated. Something about the property deal. There it was. The thread pulling everything together. I closed my notebook. "What about it?" "They're stuck," he admitted. "They can't finalize the acquisition." I leaned back in my chair. "And they think you might have insight." I let a small silence stretch between us. "They think that now." Daniel ran a hand through his hair. "Look, can we just go? Please." I studied him for a moment. Then I said, "All right." That night, the Harper estate looked exactly the same. Perfect. Controlled. Impressive. But something felt different. When I walked in, they greeted me warmly.
too warmly.
My mother-in-law, Patricia Harper, kissed my cheek like we were close. "I'm so glad you came," she said sweetly. I smiled back, equally polite. I wouldn't miss it. We sat down at the same table, the same polished surface. But this time, the atmosphere carried something else. Expectation. Halfway through dinner, Patricia placed her fork down. "We've hit a complication," she began. I remained silent. "The Westbrook property," she continued, "is slipping through our fingers." I nodded slowly. "I heard." She exchanged a glance with her husband, Robert Harper. Then she said carefully, "Daniel mentioned you might have some expertise." I met her eyes directly. "Daniel mentioned that?" Daniel shifted uncomfortably beside me. Patricia smiled again. "Well, we all know you're capable." The word hung there, almost unfamiliar on her tongue. I let a small pause build. Then I said, "I do have insight." Every eye at the table turned toward me. Robert leaned forward. "And?" I folded my hands calmly. "And I've already structured a solution." Silence. Real silence this time. Caroline frowned slightly. "You've already done it?" I nodded. "Yes." Patricia's smile tightened. "Then why haven't you shared it?" I held her gaze steadily. "Because I wasn't sure I was important enough." The words landed exactly where they needed to. No one laughed. No one moved. Daniel looked at me like he was seeing me for the first time. Robert cleared his throat. "That was a misunderstanding." I tilted my head slightly. "Was it?" Patricia tried to recover. "Of course it was." I leaned back in my chair. "I see." Another pause. Then I said, calmly and clearly, "The solution involves restructuring the acquisition through a secondary holding entity." They listened. Every word. I explained the leverage, the timing, the legal positioning. Their expressions shifted from skepticism to realization. By the time I finished, the room felt different again. Not warm, respectful. Robert nodded slowly. "That would work." Caroline looked impressed despite herself. Patricia sat very still. Then she said carefully, "We appreciate your contribution." I gave a small, polite smile. "You're welcome." But I didn't offer the documents. I didn't hand over the full strategy.
Not yet.
Because respect given only when needed isn't respect. It's dependency. And I wasn't going to confuse the two. After dinner, as we stepped outside, Daniel stopped me near the car. "I didn't know," he said quietly. I looked at him. "I know." He hesitated. "I should have handled things differently." "Yes," I said simply. He nodded slowly. For the first time, there was no defensiveness in him.
No dismissal.
Just recognition. Weeks later, the deal went through. But not the way they expected. Because I didn't give them everything. I partnered instead. On my terms. With legal clarity. With defined roles. With my name on the agreement. Not as an afterthought. As an equal. The Harpers didn't forget my presence again. Not because they suddenly changed who they were. But because I changed how I allowed myself to be seen. And that shift was something they hadn't expected.